On behalf of the entire Junior Fellow class, welcome to the 2025 Junior Fellow Conference, The Next Generation of Foreign Policy. My name is Margot Treadwell, and I'm a Junior Fellow in the Democracy, Conflict, and Governance program here at Carnegie. Today, you will hear from experts, policymakers, scholars, and journalists on our shifting global landscape and what it means for us as young professionals in foreign policy. We have been immensely lucky to serve as JFs at Carnegie for the past year. We hope that this conference provides you a small window into that experience and allows you to connect with your fellow attendees. Now, I'm excited to welcome to the stage Carnegie Endowment President Mariano Florentino Quaar to kick off our event.
Thank you, Margaret. That was the most confidently delivered introductory remarks I think I've ever heard. Thank you. You have a future in many sectors, but broadcasting being one, among many others. I will note, George Stephanopoulos started as a junior fellow, so I'm just saying. What an honor to speak to you today. I am pleased that in a moment of great tumult around the world and challenges in many sectors that are relevant to Carnegie's mission, we come together and in some sense we force the spring. I want to start by just noting that we as an organization have been with the world and a part of the world and trying to contribute to the world for 115 years. It was more than a century ago that Andrew Carnegie and a small band of advisors, including former Secretary of State Elihu Root, Nicholas Murray Butler, President of Columbia, came together to create an organization that had a mission that was as ambitious as it was unlikely, to find a way to use human knowledge and ingenuity, relationships, ideas, to stop war, to improve the world's ability to cooperate, to reduce conflict and improve governance. That was what the organization was about 115 years ago, and it's what we're about to this very day. That group around Carnegie believed that fostering knowledge, developing ideas, relationships could bring the world closer to an ever-elusive ideal, one that we know has enormously high stakes for so many billions of people around the world, which is not only to have the absence of war, but to foster an enduring peace, the kind of peace that could treat people with dignity, that could allow people to flourish. In the 1990s, another visionary thinker took the helm of the organization and shaped it and left a lasting legacy for it. I'm talking, of course, about Ambassador Mort Abramowitz, who served as the 7th president of the Carnegie Endowment from 1991 to 1997, had Samantha Power, famously as his junior fellow. Mort's faculty for thinking beyond the here and now was clear to many of people who knew him well before he came to Carnegie. He had started as an undergraduate at Stanford University. He foresaw long before most people did that China would become a central geopolitical player in the story of the world in these dramas of war and peace. That penchant for long-term thinking went on to shape Mort's distinguished career in diplomacy and in civil society. He broke with foreign policy establishment figures on several occasions to speak truth to power, to explain what was right. As U.S. Ambassador to Thailand, U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, as president of Carnegie during the Balkan Wars. He was willing to bear any short-term professional consequences if his actions could help bring peace into view. And I might add, for all of our current and former junior fellows, that's an ideal that I hope you will always live up to. It's one that we at Carnegie today try to live up to. Here at Carnegie, Mort's long-term thinking made Carnegie much of what it is today. I try to tell folks, and you've heard me say it, that not a single day goes by that we don't benefit here at Carnegie today in what we're doing on the war in Ukraine, on AI, on biotech, on U.S.-China relations, on issues involving the Middle East, Africa, nuclear policy, democracy, that we don't benefit from all the efforts that were made by my predecessors, particularly people like Mort, to build Carnegie into what it is today. Mort is the reason why we're meeting in this beautiful building. He had the vision at the time to think that what was a once Brookings Institution parking lot could have a much better purpose, and I think we've lived up to that. Mort was deeply invested in the Junior Fellows Program, mentoring young researchers who have gone on to lead prominent lives and careers in government and in civil society. He established our first global center and gave us a reason to effectively eventually reinvent the organization, not as an American organization with global interests, but as a global organization with American roots and values. And the Moscow Center, of course, after 29 years was forced to close because of the tragic invasion of Ukraine by the Russians. But the legacy of that Moscow Center lives on in the vibrant and dynamic Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center in Berlin. We were saddened by Mort's passage late last year. I sent out a message reinforcing my own admiration for Mort and his work. But we continue to be inspired by Mort's life and practical principles and engagement with the world. And I'm delighted to share another way that Mort's legacy will live on at Carnegie. Starting next year in 2026, the conference that you are now a part of right here, this conference of current and future and former junior fellows, will be named the Mort Abramowitz Junior Fellows Annual Conference. You can clap. The Mort Abramowitz Junior Fellows Conference will also have a keynote in the name of Mort Abramowitz. Honoring Mort in this way is possible thanks to the generosity and dedication of another leader committed to thinking long-term, somebody I also greatly admire, whose career spans the White House, Silicon Valley, philanthropy, law, the creation of NVIDIA, and most important, of course, service as chair of the board of the Carnegie Endowment, and that's James C. Gaither. Thank you, Jim Gaither. We're always going to be grateful. I hope that our young leaders and scholars will learn from Mort's legacy, embrace the spirit of thinking long-term, and work tirelessly to reduce conflict, advance cooperation, and strengthen democracy around the world. We are delighted today to be joined by Mort's family and some of his close friends. Mort's son, Michael, somebody I've also long admired, former president of Freedom House, will offer a few reflections before the first program kicks off. Just as Mort spent his life speaking truth to power, Michael has carried the torch forward. He spent more than 20 years as a journalist and editor at the Washington Post. He worked at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for nearly a decade, and then, of course, became president of Freedom House. His experience as a journalist, as a defender of democracy, made him the ideal person to lead Voice of America, where he served as director until earlier this year. Mike has been steadfast in his commitment to advancing freedom and democracy around the world, just like his father. Thank you for joining us today. Michael, you have the floor. Welcome.
Tino, thank you very much. Just one slight correction. I'm still the director of Voice of America. I'm on administrative leave, and I'm suing the government to get my job back and the jobs of all the 1,300 other people who worked with me at Voice of America. So it's really wonderful to be with all of you today. My family and I are incredibly grateful to the Carnegie Endowment for this wonderful, indeed fitting tribute to my dad, Mort Abramowitz. Tino, thank you so much for making this happen. In addition to your amazing stewardship of this institution, you are a very kind and thoughtful person whose friendship and counsel really means a lot to me, so thank you. I do want to especially thank Jim Gaither, whose generosity has made today's announcement possible. Mr. Gaither served as chairman of the board for at least part of the time my dad was president here, and my dad would often refer to him, at least to me, as the King of California. Not much of an overstatement, given his tremendous professional accomplishments in Silicon Valley and beyond. I really want to thank Jim Gaither for the inspired idea of recognizing my dad by supporting the naming of this very important conference after him. I'm very sorry most of you did not know my dad, although some of you did. I see my friend Stu Patrick, who I went to high school with, and I think Tom Carruthers, who might have been the last person here who worked with my dad at Carnegie, but also Aaron Miller worked with my dad, and of course my friend Lynn Davidson, who's just a wonderful person and was my dad's speechwriter. So I'm so glad you're here, and my wife Susan and daughter Katie and cousin Judy. My dad was best known as a diplomat, but he accomplished an amazing amount in his relatively short time here at Carnegie. As Tino said, he opened the Endowment's first Moscow Center. He secured this beautiful new building, although I understand it's now been upgraded since then. And also, I think one other thing that he did, which I think is quite significant, was he basically launched a very new and important organization, the International Crisis Group. It was incubated here at Carnegie, and that is actually one of his most important parts of his legacy. And then after that flurry of activity, which lasted about 6 years, my dad did something quite unusual for someone in Washington. He resigned. His friends were astonished, and so was the board. And I discussed this with Mr. Gaither last week, and Jim recalls having had a very reasoned and earnest conversation with my dad, because he was quite surprised that my dad came to him and said, "I want to quit." But he came away with an understanding of my dad's logic. Mort felt he had accomplished what he had set out to do here, and it was time for new leadership. And I've really honestly always been impressed with that approach to this, and it's one of the things that I think about with my dad a lot. My dad brought urgency and passion to everything he did, and he was focused less on analyzing problems, although that's important, and more about what to do to solve them. Do something useful was his mantra. Those are the words of Samantha Power, who got her start, as Tino said, as a junior fellow at Carnegie, working for my dad in the early 90s. Samantha was one of many young people who came under Mort's spell, which is why I think Carnegie's way of honoring his memory is so meaningful. Mort was a great mentor, and he loved young people. He took them seriously. He listened to them. He then promoted them with the full force of his networks and personality. I'm still struck by what Samantha said at Mort's funeral last year about going to work for Mort at the age of 22, when she found herself at a small meeting with her boss and the president of Turkey. And afterwards, my dad asked her, "What do you think?" And Samantha couldn't believe that Mort was interested in her opinion. And this is what Samantha said. "Mort was not a capital M mentor who would invite his young interns out for coffee to talk about how to network or get ahead. He didn't think that way, but he did something much more profound than this. He treated the young people who flocked to him as if they already had something to offer. He asked us to edit his speeches and writings. He shredded my own written work. What kind of horseshit is this?" he would often ask. "Your purple prose will get you nowhere, Samantha." And he let us watch him in action, up close, where he never condescended or projected self-importance. Samantha was not the only young person whose opinion Mort valued. There are the other Carnegie Junior Fellows he mentored and promoted, and I've become friends with them, all of them, like Shane Green, who sadly is not here. He died at a very young age, and Lucas Haynes and Georgia Levinson, and the countless other young Foreign Service officers and human rights advocates and humanitarian workers he encountered in his travels around the world. Mort was less impressed with experience and more with ideas and information, often from the youngest person in the room. If there was one thing that comforted me and my sister Rachel in the wake of my dad's death, it was the revelation of how many lives Mort had touched. Young people he mentored, promoted, and advised. And I really see this Junior Fellows program and this conference as one of the most important things that Carnegie does. And I'm so honored and pleased that at least part of this conference will continue under the name of Mort Abramowitz. And so to my friends at Carnegie, thank you so much for recognizing my dad in this fashion.
Thank you, Tino, for situating our fellowship in the history and in the goals of Carnegie. Thank you, Michael, for your leadership and for speaking to your dad's incredible legacy. I'm happy to tell you on behalf of the Junior Fellow class that mentorship and that legacy lives on and is what we are lucky to experience here. And thank you to Mr. Gaither for providing for the future of this program in the name of such an incredible legacy. Now, I'm excited to introduce our first panel, The Future of Face-to-Face Diplomacy, moderated by Stuart Patrick, Senior Fellow and Director of Carnegie's Global Order and Institutions Program. The panel will feature Craig B. Allen, Susan DiMaggio, and Ashley J. Tellis.
Go ahead, yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, or Bram, as you were known in high school, for just really basically channeling your father and also dedicating your own life to the same sort of values that he did so much to foster. And I can't agree more with what you said about how important the the junior fellowship program is at Carnegie Endowment. It is part of the lifeblood of this institution. It injects new ideas into our collective bloodstream, and occasionally the junior fellows teach old dogs a few new tricks, whether in editing their work or providing new ideas for the rest of us to hopefully shine and help the institution. So I really, really appreciate that. Now, of course, the sad thing about junior fellows is that they are only here on loan, and we only get to borrow them. Now is the time where they're thinking about where they're going to go next and where they're going to take their talents. And so this is honoring everything that you've accomplished since you've been here. And I just want to say from my perspective, I've only been here a little less than 3 years, but one of the things that sets the Carnegie Endowment apart is precisely this junior fellow program. And not only have people gone on to bigger and better things, but they have enriched the experience of those of us who stay here immeasurably, and so we look forward to the new crop coming in each time. Now, and I have to recognize my friend Lynn Davidson too as well, who I worked with when we were at Secretary Colin Powell's the policy planning staff a number of years ago, back in the middle Paleolithic, I believe that was, when stone tools had been discovered. We have a wonderful crew here to walk us through the topic which we're going to be discussing, which is the value of face-to-face diplomacy. And I'll introduce them in a second. I have to say that when I first heard that the JFs had come up with this theme, I found it a little bit quaint in our digital age. We obviously live in an environment where so many of our social interactions are mediated by technology platforms and digital appliances, and face-to-face interaction and visual cues are sometimes found a little bit wanting, and so it seemed very much of a throwback. We've never been so connected in some ways, and yet so disconnected. And when it comes to mutual understanding, I think this is important in all aspects of our life, but it seems in particular to have major potential negative ramifications at the international level, where of course mutual understanding is in some ways by definition harder than it is as you go outward from your own family unit to larger issues. And it's also incredibly important at this moment of, it's a cliche to say that we live at a time of extraordinary turbulence, whether it's geopolitical competition, economic grievances, political populism, nationalist passions, technological disruption, ecological disruption, et cetera, where actually mutual comprehension and understanding, or at least strategic empathy, if not necessarily agreement, is an enormously important thing to be able to accomplish. And so I think that's why the junior fellows basically decided in their infinite wisdom that we should have a session devoted to, are there any lessons that we can learn from the importance of face-to-face diplomacy in this age of digital communication? And what might be some of the secrets to success in this as this new generation of foreign policy leaders gets ready to go on to their marvelous next chapters, and we will be watching and cheering you as you do so. Fortunately, we have 3 thoughtful commentators to help walk us through this, and all of them have had this great experience of different types of diplomacy, right? Whether it's track 2 or track 1.5 diplomacy, whether it's dealing with multilateral institutions like APEC or ASEAN, et cetera, or bilateral negotiations on very sensitive issues. Ambassador Craig Allen has a long and distinguished career in public service as well as the private sector. He's former ambassador to Brunei and also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Asia and also a DAS in that department for China. He's now at the Cohen Group after serving as president of the U.S.-China Business Council, and he has great experience in trade negotiations as well as broader economic and indeed environmental issues. Suzanne DiMaggio is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a leading authority and practitioner on Track 1.5 and Track 2 dialogues. This has included very difficult negotiations with what my friend Rob Litvak, formerly of the Wilson Center, calls outlier states, and particularly on issues related to non-proliferation and regional security and insecurity. Ashley Tellis is the Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment. Besides being a leading authority and a prolific, and I have to say very eloquent writer on all matters of geopolitics in Asia, he also helped shepherd the successful negotiations of the U.S.-China-India civil nuclear agreement, so has much to say on this particular topic. What I'd like to do, for starters, is just ask each of you to offer some general reflections, and at least in this instance, we'll start with the ambassador and work our way to Ashley. And this is based on general reflections based on your personal experiences or anecdotes about face-to-face diplomacy. And let me just mention three general themes here. One of them, does face-to-face diplomacy matter? For instance, does it make a difference in your view? Or the second would be, are there particular circumstances or issue areas where it's particularly vital? And to the degree that you have found that it does matter, are there preconditions or approaches that you've found that have been especially useful?
Oh, terrific. Well, what an honor to be here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd say that being a diplomat is a little bit like being a good carpenter. You have a toolbox. You need to use the right tool at the right time. You don't use a saw to polish. You don't use a hammer to screw in a screw. You use the right tool at the right time. And there are many elements of diplomacy here, from sweet talking to legal force to multilateral, bilateral, plurilateral, but all of them require face-to-face. It is a common denominator throughout all of diplomacy, and even if you are on a screen, that is still face-to-face. And I guess if I had one kind of big takeaway about how the importance of face-to-face, it's perhaps a little bit counterintuitive, but the most important thing for a young diplomat or a young a young person looking for a career in this area in Washington is that the face-to-face within your agency, within your office, within your government is the most important ingredient of success. When you go into the room to negotiate with whomever you're going to negotiate with, you have to have the confidence of your secretary, the president, and everyone in your chain of command. And if you don't, then you will not be successful. And so the first lesson is, in my view, is that integrity within the context of your own bureaucratic situation is your key face-to-face, and that if you lack that confidence, or if you have someone within your own bureaucracy who doesn't agree, who won't go along, who cannot be persuaded that you're doing the right thing, then you cannot be successful. And only with that can you go in and negotiate with confidence with your interlocutors. So face-to-face is extremely important. Face-to-face with your own secretary or with the president is most important. And from there, if you have that, there's no guarantee of success. But if you don't have that, I think that it's a guarantee of failure. And a lot of that has to do with integrity and authenticity working and competence in working within your own bureaucratic structures. And that must be accomplished before any successful diplomatic negotiation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Suzanne, you've obviously been in situations where building trust and also the question of who is one speaking for, yes, as well. Can you give us some insights based on your efforts at the track 2 and track 1.5 level, and perhaps maybe a little bit of elucidation of those terms that for people who are here?
Well, first let me thank the Junior Fellows for organizing this conference. This is my favorite kind of audience to talk to, those who are just beginning their careers. So kudos to you. I mean, building on what we just heard, I think that face-to-face diplomacy is essential, still is, and will be for years to come. And we had a way to test it. During the pandemic, face-to-face diplomacy really was sidelined. People moved to virtual spaces to do it, but it wasn't quite the same. And frankly, I think to continue diplomacy virtually, it worked when you were talking to your friends and allies and partners on things that you generally agree with. But when it came time to talk to those that you don't agree with, it was much more difficult. Now, in my case, I'm not dealing in official diplomacy, track 1. I'm dealing with unofficial diplomacy, which is track 2. And track 1.5, which combines both a little bit, which is more akin to what I do. And what I found is, when the pandemic started, sorry, we tried to go to a virtual space. We even tried other methods of surveys, like just North Korean counterparts. Can you fill out this survey and then we can talk about it virtually? It didn't work. I mean, we had a lot of creative ideas, but essentially, especially I think when you're talking to those you disagree with, and especially what we would call adversaries, you really have to be in the same room, sitting across the table, and do that face to face. And when I look back on my career, I mean, some of the most interesting, not only interesting discussions I've had, but most important and consequential actually took place on the sidelines of those meetings. When you're actually away from the table and maybe meeting for coffee or dinner, that's when you could have a conversation that got away from the talking points. And that's important, I think. So as I was telling a colleague earlier, I don't think people that engage in diplomacy are going to be replaced by AI anytime soon. But that might be my own arrogance talking. But I really believe that. And I think anyone in this room who's really interested in exploring a career in diplomacy, whether it's issues like I deal with, peace and security, national security, or trade like you deal with, or issue-specific, region-specific, I encourage you to move forward, because I really, as we look ahead in this world, and as someone said, it was tumultuous, and that might be a cliche, but that's the world we live in. And I think we're going to need not only more diplomats, but maybe more importantly, people that go into other fields, into international relations, that have diplomatic skills.
That's very helpful, and I love the notion that, perhaps you have been with negotiators who you felt like might be hallucinating, but perhaps less so than AI might be prone to doing so. And also the informality is also very interesting to me, because it's often a complaint about. When the G7 was started, for instance, or the G20 was great because it was really informal. It was not overly bureaucratized, and you could actually let your hair down, metaphorically speaking, and actually sort of rub shoulders in the sidebar conversations, and leaders get to know each other, et cetera. And the same true for diplomats at all levels. But then once everything gets to be a recitation of prepared talking points, then perhaps some of the flexibility goes out. But Ashley, let me turn to you on this broad topic.
Sure, but first let me thank the Junior Fellows for inviting me. I've been at Carnegie since 2004. And I've seen a series of junior fellows whom I've had the privilege of working with.
And now 4.
Yes, and now 4. I wanted to endorse what Patrick said, which is you learn from them. And I suspect we learn from them more than they learn from us. And that's actually a privilege. On the subject, so I want to say several things. I don't think face-to-face diplomacy is ever going to be obsolete as long as there is no perfect coincidence of interests between countries. As long as there are going to be differences, we are going to need face-to-face diplomacy for 2 reasons, I would say. First, the relationship that diplomats have with their own team and with their own governments is critical for success. And I want to emphasize what Craig said. Because diplomats are agents acting for a principle. And if there's no confidence that the agent perfectly reflects the principal's preferences, the war is lost even before you begin. So creating that internal consensus behind the position that you are going to put forward and try and persuade the person on the other side is really the first task of successful diplomacy, and that begins at home. And I've never seen an interagency process that works purely through automation without people being in the room, sometimes arguing, sometimes having food fights, sometimes having vicious disagreements. But if all goes well, you come out with a position that you can effectively defend in a forum. When you get to the table, I think the core element of success is really the building of a relationship with your counterparts. Because your negotiating positions are always constrained by what your national interests demand. You can't go out there and make stuff up simply to get an agreement. But what you can do is make the outcome harder to achieve or easier to achieve. And the one intangible that goes beyond all the talking points that we are armed with when we go into the negotiation is our ability to build a relationship with our interlocutors that transcends the specifics of the negotiation. And particularly if the negotiations are difficult, particularly if the negotiations are protracted, then having that personal relationship with your interlocutors makes a huge difference to being able to see what the other side's perspectives are, hopefully communicating your own perspectives with equal effectiveness, and then expanding the solution space within which a negotiated outcome can be achieved. And you can't do that through automation. And as Suzanne said, we actually had a social science experiment, and that was during the pandemic. And we discovered that when we did meaningful negotiations across the airwaves, they were completely perfunctory, they were completely scripted, and they produced nothing of value. First, because you often could not see the body language of the other side with any accuracy. And because of the realities of our age, when you negotiate over the airwaves, you're worried about who else might be listening. So just the simple fact that there might be an audience which is unintended essentially constrains your ability to reach the outcomes you want. So there is no alternative to being in the room and doing this face-to-face.
Very interesting on that. We've already touched a little bit on technology, but certainly I, like some people in this room, have occasionally found using certain channels of communication when there's something tense to discuss might be better done in person than say on a text, as my wife frequently reminds me. But I think that but there's no question that the body language and the one thing that I do want to get to, so put this in the back of your mind, is the question of principal agent and the degree of sort of a leeway and how much room do you have to roam in terms of so you want to get, there presumably, I'm imagining, is a sweet spot where you have instructions, and it's clear you're speaking on behalf of your principal, but on the other hand, you have at least some flexibility at different times. I want to bring it up to the present day, though, and think about the Trump administration in this regard. It's interesting, the president obviously has a highly personalist approach to many things, to governance, but also appears to have a very personalist style when it comes to interacting with foreign leaders, and also has appointed special envoys. Steve Witkoff comes to mind, but also Rick Grinnell and others. How do you see personal diplomacy within, and we'll start with Ashley and then we'll work our way down. How do you see personal diplomacy unfolding in this particular administration? Is it mostly simply an expression of transactionalism, or is it is in some ways bypassing some of the traditional instruments of U.S. foreign policy, State Department assistant secretaries, for instance? Is there a method in that as well? Is there something to be said for it, or are there huge drawbacks?
So I don't see the Trump administration as having given up on the importance of face-to-face diplomacy. The fact that the president has appointed special envoys, and in the previous iteration when he was president the last time around, the role that his own son-in-law played in political negotiations is testament to the fact that he believes that people can achieve things. He believes in the people he trusts, and he empowers those people to go out and do stuff. The challenge that I see with the Trump administration is less the effectiveness of face-to-face diplomacy, more problems with clarity and consistency of policy. And so that is, in some sense, the background condition within which diplomacy either succeeds or fails. That is, you can have the world's best diplomats. You could have Henry Kissinger come back to life. But if he was tasked with executing a policy that was not particularly clear either to him or to the principal he served, not even all the Kissingerian magic would produce the outcomes that he did, for example, either in the SALT negotiations or with China or in the Middle East. So the challenge that I see that we face today is twofold: clarity and consistency of policy, and two, creating an organizational structure that actually enables the president to take whatever ideas he may have about policy and execute them in a systematic fashion. And I think that's where we have real liabilities on both those counts. On the second, our institutions are being hollowed out, and therefore we don't have the capacities increasingly to do this. And then on the first, of course, we have policies sometimes made by whim.
Yes.
Policies that are quite idiosyncratic, not particularly consistent, and often not even clearly communicated to subordinates who have to execute that policy. And those are bigger problems than just the challenges of diplomacy.
Yeah, indeed. I served on the policy planning staff as an international affairs fellow during the first George W. Bush term, and there, if there was incoherence, it was often less perhaps the capriciousness of necessarily the president, but very strong divisions within the administration too, which is a different kind of incoherence at different times. Yeah, please.
Yeah, when I look at so far these first few months of the Trump administration, I definitely see continuity on the emphasis of personality-driven diplomacy at the highest level. And when you look at what President Trump, how he self-describes himself as a peacemaker, a uniter. If you looked at his most interesting speech that he gave in Riyadh recently, he said things like talking out against US interventionism. He said he does not have permanent enemies. So all these things point to a greater role for diplomacy, but we have to ask ourselves, is that what we're actually seeing? And I have some doubts. And if you look instead, we see a downscaling of the State Department, cutting back on the budget. We see a lot of disruption at the NSC. It's not playing its traditional role anymore. USAID has been disbanded. So all these tools to do diplomacy are being undercut. So that's something to be worried about. How will we get this diplomacy accomplished without what we should be doing is investing in these tools, probably more so than we have been. And then if you look at President Trump's first term, his diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, I think it is a very interesting test case to examine. There it was summit-level diplomacy, driven by the president for sure. He had an envoy, but ultimately it failed, and it failed quite spectacularly. And why did it fail? And I would argue that one of the reasons, the key reasons, is that the groundwork of building the foundation for diplomacy was never set. So we went from summit to summit, but the working level diplomats really never had a chance to be meeting constantly with their counterparts to build these deliverables. And instead you had these grand meetings that were quite spectacles to behold. But at the end of the day, there was no substance there. Even the first document that came out of that first summit was a 1.5-page document that set out some key principles for what diplomacy could do, but there was never an opportunity to build on it. So that, I think, I'm worried that we're going to repeat that mistake. We see senior envoys like Mr. Witkoff, who are working clearly, closely with the president, probably that appeals to the people involved in these discussions. But at the end of the day, is the real diplomacy, the real work of diplomacy, is it getting done? And that's what I question, because we know that's very painstaking work. It takes many, many face-to-face meetings. I mean, you can't do that over email. And it also takes the time and patience to build trust. And I think those are key elements right now that we have yet to see.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Ambassador.
So let me approach the question kind of from two different angles, both institutionally and then normatively. During the first Trump administration, we had 4 national security advisors, and currently we had one who was left, and now the Secretary of State has been asked to fill that role temporarily. And I think that a strong National Security Council that's the way that we coordinate policy. That's the way that we put the bureaucracies together, informed by the intelligence communities, to hammer out a single coherent policy that all agencies will follow, even if they don't like it. And that process can be long and arduous. There are endless meetings going on to form a coordinated policy. But once it's done and it's approved by the president, then you're good to go. And until it's changed, everyone is on board. Now, with the Secretary of State serving as the acting National Security Council, that process doesn't really work as effectively as it should, because the State Department is only one player within the bureaucracy, and you don't have that free market of ideas in the Situation Room to hammer out the best policy. And I worry that the slimming down of the National Security Council is going to lead to more incoherence and factional rivalry within our administration. Let me say a couple words normatively, and I'll focus on the trade side here. You know, our trade negotiators, they know all the trade negotiators from every other country. In many cases, we've known each other for decades, and we've gone through endless negotiations. We see each other in Geneva, we see each other at APEC. You know, we're colleagues, professional colleagues. And always in the past, the trade negotiations were done on a reciprocal basis. Let's do this, you do that, we're good. And we can move global prosperity forward. That's changed. Under an America First foreign policy, it is no longer that reciprocal negotiation. It is much more, what can you bring me today to bring down the trade deficit that we have with you? And this is not a debate about how we improve our economic efficiency, how we support our companies. It's what do you have today to bring down your trade deficit with me? And that's a very different form of negotiation. And that, in my view, underscores the importance of face-to-face, because many of our trade negotiators who have known each other for years are suddenly dealing on a completely different normative basis as the structure of their negotiation. And that's either going to work or it's not going to work based on their face-to-face and their personal relationships. And if they can convince the other side that, sorry, the game, we're playing a different game here. This is a different type of negotiation. Bear with us and we'll get through this together. If they're able to do that, great. And if they're not able to do that, well, I think it's clear and obvious that not all of our interlocutors are going to sit well with an America First foreign policy. And it is a job of the diplomat to implement the president's policy, and we need to make every effort to try to follow the president as in accordance to the Constitution and our international treaty agreements. And that is not getting easier.
I wanted to pick up on an implication of raised by not only this trend towards America First, and so therefore this is certainly a different style and perhaps quite a bit of a different content of diplomacy that's going on. But also this question of, you worked at the Commerce Department, and at the State Department, as Lynn will remember, there was always quite a bit of jealousy about who speaks for the voice of foreign policy. And Donnybrook's between HHS and what they were doing on global health security versus what should be the purview of a small office in the international health affairs at the State Department at the time. And those go on and continue. Can you tell me a little bit about any experiences you had in terms of this sort of rivalry amongst, in a sense, who is, to the degree somebody's doing face-to-face diplomacy, who actually is speaking for the United States?
So this is a constant. One needs to understand American bureaucratic protocols to be effective in dealing with other agencies. And indeed, at the cabinet level, there are oftentimes rivalries, sometimes fierce rivalries, between different cabinet members, both of whom have an important say in a decision. And it's incumbent upon them to work it out. In the first Trump administration, there were stories about how Peter Navarro got into public fights in front of the Chinese with the Secretary of Commerce. That is a bad look. You never, ever want those disputes to become public, because you're just aiding your diplomatic rival here. And indeed, as an American diplomat, when I saw the Chinese fighting, I loved it because that would open a window to me about the bureaucratic lay of the land there that I would exploit as ruthlessly as possible. And so these tensions must be managed in advance. And I'm not sure if that's easier or harder with the president as the only decider here, because who's going to brief the president? And what are they going to accentuate? And will they take care of the other guy's interests here when they brief the president before a decision is made? And I think that has become an important ingredient in the recipe that is our foreign policy.
Wonderful. I think what I might do is turn things now over to the collective wisdom in this group and ask whether or not there are any questions from the floor about personal diplomacy. Face-to-face diplomacy. Yes, please. Thanks. And please introduce yourself. Beatrix.
Hi, I'm Beatrix, research analyst here at Carnegie. I was wondering if you could each speak about one of the most difficult experiences you've had doing face-to-face diplomacy.
That's great. Do we have a volunteer to go first, or difficult and/or challenging?
Well,
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell a little story. In Beijing, about 15 years ago, very difficult, what I thought would be a pretty easy negotiation and associated with APEC, and I thought we would reach agreement pretty quickly. And we just kind of ran into a brick wall, and I just couldn't understand why we couldn't reach this agreement. And over lunch, I sat next to my interlocutor, and he said, well, Mr. Allen, we were speaking in Chinese, no interpreter, nobody else around. He said, there is a problem in the way that you are framing your proposal. If you adjust the framing like this, then the one office standing in the way of your proposal will be satisfied, and then you will get to an agreement. I went, oh, gosh, that's useful. Thank you very much. And went to my secretary immediately after that and reported up what I had heard. We reprised that discussion after lunch and immediately reached agreement. If I did not have that conversation in Chinese without a translator, without anybody else who wanted the agreement, it wouldn't have happened. Language is important.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead,
To
Suzanne.
me, it's not so much a specific difficulty. It's more like a difficult saga that has spanned 25 years of my career. When I started especially doing US-Iran track 1.5, track 2 work, almost 25 years ago, it's a lesson that I've learned time and time again, and I've seen opportunities for diplomacy between these two adversaries now, that we've been in this adversarial relationship since the US hostage crisis and then the revolution. But it's really a lesson, and that is when the chance for a diplomatic initiative emerges. Time and time again, I've seen either one side or the other not take it. And the US-Iran relationship now has been replete with these lost opportunities. When one side is ready, the other isn't. And I have two examples. One is early in this process of dialogue with the Iranians during the George W. Bush administration. There was an interesting document that appeared that called for a so-called grand bargain, really covered a lot of ground. The parentage of the document was mysterious. The Iranians said it was an American document. The Americans said it was an Iranian document. Eventually, the Iranians endorsed it, but the Bush administration decided not to pursue it. I think that was a big mistake. I mean, think back to those years. The Iranians were spinning, only about 200 centrifuges at that time. Their stockpile was basically zero, and look where we are now. The second came more recently, and that was during the Biden administration. And when Joe Biden was a candidate, one of the things he would say on every stop or whenever foreign policy came up was that one of the first things he'd do was get back into the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Well, during that period, we worked very actively on trying to set the groundwork for that through Track 1.5. And when the time came, the administration decided to delay, not to grab that opportunity that the Iranians were ready to get back into the deal, but our side wasn't. I think that was a strategic mistake too. Again, look where we are now with the Iranian nuclear program so far advanced. So I guess the big lesson for me is when, especially when it comes to adversaries, when a chance for diplomacy emerges, take it, pursue it relentlessly. That's the job of diplomats. So that would be my lifelong frustration as part of this work is I've seen opportunities big like the ones I've just mentioned, but countless other smaller opportunities for diplomacy that would help de-escalate, that would help reduce tensions, that may not result in a big deal, but would keep things calm and less hostile. So that would be my answer to your question.
Ashley, do you have any reflections?
As Stuart mentioned, I was deeply involved in the US-India civil nuclear negotiations, which formally lasted from 2005 to 2008. But some would say continued to this day because there's still unfinished business out there. It was an extremely difficult negotiation, not because of a lack of goodwill on either side, but because President Bush made a decision which essentially put us into terra incognita. I'll explain this very simply. Until that agreement was announced, the United States divided the world into two categories: states with nuclear weapons, which were essentially the P5 states, and the rest, which are non-nuclear weapon states. What George W. Bush did through the agreement with India was he essentially created a third category of a state which had nuclear weapons, but would not be treated as a legitimate nuclear weapon state, but would have all the privileges of a legitimate nuclear weapon state. Now just think about that for a moment. We've spent 40 years of non-proliferation policy essentially making certain that these two categories of nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states was as robust as it could be. And now we created an exception that required us to navigate what specific privileges we were going to provide India as part of this agreement. So we were essentially trying to create a new set of precedents for which there was no precedent. And we were doing this actively through two negotiations that were being conducted in parallel. One among ourselves, inside the US government, because there were very strong opposition to the president's decision. And so I had to negotiate with my own colleagues at State, at DOD, at Energy, and the intelligence community, even as we were conducting this negotiation with the Indians. And so trying to figure out what was essentially the most acceptable path to all these actors before we even got to India was an extremely difficult task. And it goes to the point that the ambassador made earlier. We would not have been able to do this with the Indians because that was difficult enough. Because as you can imagine, India wanted a lot. We could not give the Indians everything they wanted, even if we were sympathetic to their objectives. The challenge was trying to get enough consensus within our own team. And for every hour that I spent with the Indians in a formal discussion, we spent hundreds of hours inside the US government arguing these issues to death. And it goes back to the point that the ambassador made, which I really want to emphasize. principals, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot conduct a negotiation successfully if the core issues are not analyzed to depth at lower levels, if those options are not distilled through the collective wisdom of the US government and then presented up to principals in terms of very simple options. If you go into a negotiation without that hard work done in the back rooms of negotiating different possibilities, examining the pros and cons of every possibility, and then briefing the principals on the 2 or 3 big options that they ought to consider for decision, what you will get is a very ragged outcome. And the reason we were able to succeed was because by the time we got to the negotiating table with India, we had already debated the risks to the positions that we were taking on the inside. And some of the positions we took were very risky. There's no question about it. But at least we went into those negotiations with complete malice aforethought. There were no surprises. We knew what we were trading off. We made those choices internally, and then we put our best foot forward. And even then, we didn't get everything we wanted, but at least that was acceptable because in the internal discussions, we had anticipated the possibility that we would not get everything. So in other words, diplomacy takes a lot of hard work. And what you see at the superstructure of success is really built on an edifice of countless individuals who will never be heard from, never be seen, never be recognized, but who are indispensable for the success of what their principals do.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Any other question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Benin. I'm with the Middle East program here as a junior fellow. Thank you so much for coming out to speak to us today. One of the questions I'm sure a lot of young people here are curious to know, in the last 10 to 20 years, the track to a career in diplomacy has changed significantly. And so if you have any words of wisdom or advice for people who are interested in following that career path, especially with the rising conflict and tensions in the world and this administration, what's going on, I would love to hear what you have to say.
And can we take this second question here too? Thanks, Faisal. Because I'm not, no, sorry, the woman in front, yeah, there.
Hi,
Please
this is
introduce
Shanila
yourself.
Parekh. I'm a recent graduate of Middlebury Institute. Thank you so much for the insights. I'm more interested in knowing the future of face-to-face diplomacy, especially in the age of information warfare.
Great. So the second question is the future of face-to-face diplomacy, particularly in the context of information warfare and the technological and tsunami that is upon us. And then the first question was, what would you advise for people getting into this field? Maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Ambassador.
I have a good friend, one of China's greatest American scholars, and he said, these Track 2 dialogues are fantastic, but it would be better if the speeches were 5 minutes and the coffee break were 55 minutes. And I think that there's an important truth about that, about face-to-face diplomacy, that the time spent with your interlocutor in a corner, intently questioning back and forth and getting their real response of somebody you know within boundaries that they have the information, you can trust them, and they're good for the information. That's cannot be done over Zoom. And that's why during the COVID era, diplomacy really took a back. It really wasn't effective because you couldn't get the real skinny from the people who had it, and you needed to understand particularly the dynamics within their country. Tell me why this isn't working. Help me figure out how to get this done. Which part of your government disagrees with this common sense so that we can work around it? Those are the type of questions that you have to do in private, generally. Vis-a-vis the next this is a very difficult time. 40 years ago, I came to Washington, and you had the presidential management internship program, you had the fellows program, you had junior officer program, you had a junior at the World Bank. It was all different routes. People got on a treadmill and cool. It's all different now, and I'm sorry about that. I hugely regret the termination of all of the intelligence agency people who had been trained for 2-3 years in many cases in the name of waste, fraud, and abuse. Anyway, foreign policy will go on, guarantee you that. It's just that it's going to be a different foreign policy. And states and cities need your expertise. Think tanks need your expertise. Consulting companies need your expertise. Academics need your expertise. And because the government has been so hollowed out, they're going to be coming to the Carnegie Institute for help because they have to. There's no choice. They need your ideas. They need your experience. And so plug in a different way. And again, what I would say, language is extremely important. And so if you're in an interregnum here and it's not working out quite, then go learn Swahili or whatever, but learn it well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Messer.
I would endorse everything that the ambassador just said about careers in traditional diplomacy, track 1 diplomacy. But let me talk a little bit about potential careers in track 2 diplomacy. Early in my career, I remember talking to a very thoughtful American diplomat who was talking to me about joining a particular administration at the time. And we had a long talk about it, and I said, well, if I join the administration, could I travel to the countries I'm most interested in, Iran and North Korea, and also Burma, Myanmar at the time? And he said, absolutely not. You'll never have that chance if you come into the Foreign Service. And I said, well, can I get on an airplane and go meet the foreign minister of Iran when it would be important to do so? He said, absolutely not. You'll never get to do that if you join the Foreign. So my response was, why the hell would I want to join the Foreign Service? But my point is that Track 2 offered an avenue for me to pursue the countries, the types of discussions I wanted to have and with whom. And I think that it is a potential and a viable career choice. And also, you can go back and forth into official diplomacy and unofficial diplomacy. I mean, what I find so appealing about this work is that, on the one hand, you're not an official negotiator. You're not there to talk about the policies within the strict confines of what the administration is doing. But on the other hand, you have to be well versed in it. You can't just go in there and freelance as well. So there's a very disciplined part of this work as well, where you have to have built the relationships and the work to engage with administrations as you do it. You're not speaking for them, but you want to be informed about it. Sometimes you're even used, if you're credible enough, to convey messages, to discuss things, to float trial balloons, to pursue discussions on potential red lines, to clarify what you think are the intentions. And that's the most exciting part of the job, I think, is having the flexibility to talk about those issues while not being official. So if that sounds attractive to you, then it might be something you'd like to pursue. I mean, it does take some entrepreneurial flair to get things up and running. And it takes a lot of persistence because you have to present yourself as a credible interlocutor over time. A lot of times the work has to be done with discretion. And a lot of times, you know, you are actually flying by the seat of your pants because you don't have access to intelligence. You don't know what people who are officially engaging with know. But I think it could be an important and exciting career choice if it sounds appealing to you as a way to use diplomatic skills in unofficial contexts.
Yeah, I have to say that I admire Suzanne's career trajectory, showing what you can do with some imagination and some entrepreneurial spirit, and also being comfortable without necessarily having a parachute or a landing mat underneath you. But kudos to you for everything you've done. Ashley, do you have some
I would just
reflections on
say that this is obviously a difficult time to say this, but if there are folks in this audience who are considering a career as a Foreign Service officer, I would say don't give up on the dream. For several reasons, right? The United States is not disappearing as a great power, even if we find ourselves in a fit of absence of mind at the moment. So we are going to need the capacity for diplomatic representation abroad. I served for 3 years in the US Embassy in New Delhi before I came to the White House. And I saw what Foreign Service officers do on the front lines. And what they do is simply indispensable. And as Winston Churchill said, you can count on the United States to do the right thing after it's exhausted all other alternatives. So I hope that one day we will get back to recognizing that diplomacy is central to our capacity to shape the world in ways that serve our interests. And perversely, because of the current winnowing of the State Department, there may be actually new opportunities because we will have to replenish the human capital coffers of the department simply to fill the big holes that have been created by the premature retirements of some very senior diplomats. Tragic for the United States, but you know, in a perverse way, it may create new opportunities. So I would just simply say, don't give up on that dream. It is extremely important for American interests, and it's a task that you can carry out, you know, with distinction and with devotion, because it's so important to our success in the world.
Well, I want to thank all three of our speakers for bringing their tremendous array of experiences to bear on what is a really fascinating question. And I'm not sure we didn't get to the part about whether or not face-to-face diplomats are born or can be made and forged in a variety of circumstances, or perhaps trained at the Foreign Service Institute. But you've all proven masters at it, and also masters at explaining it. And I think that all I can say from my perspective is to the junior fellows, thank you, not only for being here in the audience, but also thank you for all the contributions that you've made to Carnegie over the past year. We really look forward to seeing you flourish and continue to flourish and continue to develop in your various trajectories, and there will be many different paths you go down. So please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you. Great, thank you, Stuart.
I'll echo Stuart in thanking all of our speakers.